Success in Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
And welcome. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. It's Kerry, Lutz. And, well, got to know that wherever you look in the mainstream media, the government, you're not getting the truth. You're not getting the truth about what's really going on. You're not getting the truth about how seriously off the economy is, what a disaster the economy is, the prospects of any true recovery occurring. And that's why we've got Hugh Smith on with us now of twominds.com, who recently wrote an article that got picked up by Zero Hedge about the empire of lies, because that's what it really is. And Charles, welcome back. How are you?
Thank you very much, Kerry. Glad to be here.
Hey, so empire of lies, obviously something inspired you to write it.
Well, Ron Paul apparently used the phrase in his book, The Revolution, a Manifesto, which came out in January 2008. And I actually wasn't aware of that. I had just thought I'd conjured it up back in 2007 when I wrote a piece called Empire of Lies, the Kingdom of Magical Thinking. And of course, whoever invented the phrase, and maybe it was somebody years ago, or but it's still I think it's a phrase that encapsulates our situation, which is the whole status quo, and that's the political, the financial. It's all based on a continual stream of lies, and we've become habituated to this, and so we no longer expect the truth. And that's not only disturbing, but it's very destructive. And so that's why it's so refreshing to hear the new Greek leadership state these unvarnished truths, such as we're a bankrupt nation. And it's all like, cheers, like we all know that's the truth, but nobody in the policymaking realm has the courage to say this because they're afraid of the consequences of the truth. Yeah, and that's a pretty sad statement, isn't it?
It certainly is. And it's kind of the emperor's new clothes, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's really kind of tied in with there. The empire of lies revolves around the emperor's new clothes, which she doesn't have any.
Right. And Kerry, if we go back, I was just trying to refresh my memory of, it's already been like 4 years since the first Greek debt crisis. And we have to go back and remember that, Goldman Sachs played a critical role in basically fluffing up Greece's balance sheets and its financial statements to get it euro to join the euro. And so the big banks were colluding, if you will, with the oligarchy of Greece, because they both made out like bandits in joining the euro and having access to these huge lines of credit, essentially, that were based not on Greece's real economy, which was always marginal, but on the illusion of solvency that Goldman Sachs sort of jury-rigged.
That's right. They did a whole bunch of financial ledgermen with credit default swaps, so they managed to hide a bunch of Greek sovereign debt to make it look like their deficit was actually lower than it actually was, if memory serves me correct, right?
That's right.
Therefore, because there was the Maastricht Treaty, which called for members of the EU to actually have debt below a certain amount of GDP. If you didn't do that, you couldn't actually get into the organization, and you couldn't adopt the euro as your currency. And it would have been good if Greece didn't get into that failed experiment as things turned out, right?
Right. And, Kerry, I kind of use a household analogy for Greece, which is Greece got handed basically its rich cousin's credit card. Once
right.
it joined the euro, then it got this unlimited credit card, and it could borrow a lot of money at really low interest rates, not much different from the economic powerhouses like Germany and the Netherlands. And so, of course, what do most, you know, human beings do when given an unlimited line of credit with low interest rates? Well, they run it right up. And, Greece has a lot of structural problems that I think a lot of people don't understand, that it's a country that's a democracy, but it's ruled by an oligarchy, much like the U.S. and China and
Yeah.
all the other nations of the world. But I think the Greek oligarchy is particularly pernicious, from what I can gather. And so, the Greeks should have kicked the oligarchs out, way back when, but they didn't. And now they seem to be terrified of the consequences of having their own currency, which is another way of saying the credit card's going to go away, and you're going to have to live on your own earnings and the sweat of your brow. And so that's partly why the Greeks seem to be fearful of exiting the euro. But that's really, isn't that the only way forward, is to go ahead and cut up your credit cards and move forward and make the reforms that are necessary?
Well, one would think that's the way that it should work, but they're doing everything they can to avoid it, because it's going to mean massive layoffs. It's going to mean a day of reckoning for underfunded, unfunded pension funds. It's just going to be the worst of all possible worlds for the Greeks, because it's kind of like the underwater homeowner whose house the bank isn't foreclosing because they got too many others to get around to, and who still has some credit card debt. They haven't quite maxed out a couple of cards, and they're still managing to go out to eat dinner. But once that card is shut down, boom, it's over, right?
Yeah. And yet, as we've talked about, Kerry, in the past, humans have a remarkable ability to adjust when they have to. And so, life will go on in Greece, and so in a way, it's a shame that they didn't make the adjustment 4 years ago. But instead, they borrowed another $245 billion, which is basically the size of their GDP, from European nations mostly, and I was doing a little digging. I'm going to write about that for tomorrow, that this the European Stabilization Fund, that gave Greece most of the money, is basically guaranteed by all the other EU nations. And so the bill's going to eventually land on the taxpayers of Europe. And, you have to wonder, other than Goldman Sachs and the rest of the banking crowd and the oligarchs in Greece, well, who else won? Who else gained from this massive expansion of debt for what was clearly a marginal and already insolvent nation? And I don't have an answer, other than the EU leadership itself wanted to maintain the illusion of solidity, and that the EU was the euro was really gonna work, and to stave off the realization that the euro was a failed experiment.
Well, one guest I had on, I guess it was Rob Kirby, said it was the globalists' effort to take over, and the globalists are going to be the big losers here. And he might very well be correct. This could be a big stake through the heart of globalism, because it's not working out too well.
No, and it's going to set off a lot of dominoes of political upheaval, as the voters in other countries are going to be asked to approve of basically funding the Greeks' default. That's not going to go over real big.
No, it's not. And not only is it not going to go over too big, you could see this precipitating the breakup, or at least the division of the euro into the financially solvent, the haves and the have-nots, I guess you would call it. And it was a bad idea from the get-go. Milton Friedman nailed it way back when, predicted it, and so did many others. So it's just the way it's going to work out. And now it's just become like the all-time best guaranteed short in the world.
Yeah, Kerry, I was trying to figure out, like, how do we summarize why the euro was doomed? And I'm not familiar with what Friedman said, but in my view, there's two ways to discipline an entity, fiscally and financially, whether it's a household or a government, or it's either the market. The market disciplines us because it sets a price on everything, including risk and goods and services, credit, you name it. But the other form of discipline is the state, the government. And so what the euro was an experiment in which a super state, i.e. the EU itself, was going to discipline all of its member countries. And as you said, this included like fiscal deficit caps and all these various bureaucratic rules and regulations, and those were supposed to substitute for the currency market. In other words, in the real world, your currency, your national currency, reflects your solvency and the innovation, the surplus, all the different elements of your economy are reflected in your currency. So if you take all that away, which is what the euro did, then there's no price discovery. And so now I think what we're really seeing is what the consequences, the catastrophic consequences of taking away the market and the ability to discover the price, the true value of each nation's output and currency.
Yeah. Well, yeah, what Friedman said was that the differences between the countries would eventually assert themselves one way or the other, I think was what he said. And he just didn't see it surviving over the long haul. What Martin Armstrong said was you can't have a monetary union without the countries having a debt union as well. Without a common debt, a common currency, without common debt, because effectively what he says is that that debt is a currency now. And think about it, every dollar, a debt-based currency is, every dollar, every euro is born into existence by borrowing, right? So
right.
If you don't have a debt union and you have a monetary union, think about that. It's just going to blow apart in the end, and that's what's pretty much well happening here. So if it was backed up by gold reserves and each country was really required to have it, and there was no fractional reserve banking, something that could never occur in today's economic environment, then it could theoretically occur, but then you wouldn't really need it. So, right, if you had 100% reserve requirement, no fractional reserve banking, why would you need a euro?
Right. And then, but you couldn't create mountains of debt out of nothing, and that's what we're all depending on.
Exactly. So, very interesting, but as well as I do, the way this thing is going to end, it's quite obvious and unfortunate that so many people are going to get hurt in the U.S. as well as here. It's not going to be pleasant, and going to be really bad for a lot of people. But Empire of Lies has to continue on till the last lie is told, right, Charles?
Yeah, that's right.
So, and obviously, at some point, you wake up and realize that they've got nothing to give you but lies, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting how as long as people feel that they're benefiting from the status quo, they will they will cling on to the empire of lies because they fear the alternative. And so we all know how this has played out in history, and we can go back to the Roman Empire and its famous bread and circuses, right? That it distributed free bread and had free circuses in the Colosseum for the jobless, rootless masses in the capital of Rome, and this was all to distract them from the crumbling of the empire. And it's pretty easy to see those same things at work in our world.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, that's exactly what we're seeing now, and it's really kind of crazy when you look at what's going on around us. Talk about bread and circuses, huh?
Well, Kerry, you mentioned that the implosion of the euro, whether it takes 6 months or if it drags out for 6 more years, is going to impact everybody in the world. I'm curious, how do you see that playing out for the average American? Because on at least the surface, Europe's going to get a lot cheaper to visit when as the euro gets, as you say, gets devalued against the dollar. But it's going to set off shockwaves throughout the whole global economy.
Well, it's obviously money's going to come flooding into the U.S. The dollar keeps going up in value. Well, this is the commonly perceived wisdom. If it works out this way or not, I'm not sure, but it seems to me it always has, that the dollar is the last man standing, and then the U.S. economy kind of starts going down because you can't have a dollar so strong that it edges out everything else. And then exports from the U.S., you already see them declining, sends the country into a recession. I don't know. Well, the safe haven capital flooding the U.S., kind of just like what happened during the Great Depression. So none of it's really that good. It's just relative perception of safety, right?
Right. Yeah, and a strong currency, it has benefits if you're buying stuff in other currencies, but it has unintended consequences, which is why almost every country in the world seems to be trying to devalue its currency, right, to save its export sector and so on. And but everybody can't depreciate their currency at the same time.
No,
somebody's currency has to go up. So at this point, as you said, sort of last man standing as a default, the U.S. is basically rising. The U.S. dollar is rising against all other currencies, and there's a lot of talk about China having to drop its peg to the dollar or radically change that peg to weaken its currency as kind of to match the devaluation of the Japanese yen and the other Asian export currencies.
Yes, it's none of it is good, and that it's not a long-term solution for what's ailing the world, which is a debt crisis, and the world keeps going further and further into debt, and nobody's proposed a solution for this. And the real troublemakers, your Goldmans here, haven't really done anything to solve that one, have they?
No, and I think, Kerry, when we ask what's the solution? Well, clearly the debt's got to be written off, whether it's a jubilee or equivalent. You can call it all kinds of different words, but it all means the debt goes away. And this is part of the Kondratiev cycle, right, where credit expands to the point where it's unsustainable, and then it has to contract.
Yes.
And however it contracts, whether currencies implode or economies implode, or there's an orderly write-off of debt, it's got to happen. And what a lot of people forget, those of us who are in debt, like have mortgages and so on, we tend to forget that our debt is somebody else's asset.
Right.
And so we'd like to write off student loans, but guess what? all these pension funds own Sallie Mae bonds, which are basically
Right.
the student debt got sold as an asset to somebody, an income producing asset. So when we wipe all the student debt out, pension funds and mutual funds and insurance companies and everybody that bought all those Sallie Mae bonds, they're going to have a big fat zero, where they used to have $100 million in assets. So, and that's going to impact all these entities, especially pension funds and insurance companies, which bought all this debt as quote unquote safe, high yield investments. So that's what's gonna really take down the empire of lies, is when you get rid of the debt, you get rid of all the phantom assets as well.
Yeah, these are big problems. Nobody has an answer. And like you said, Jubilee is very appealing, but then when your pension funds and your insurance companies and your banks go bankrupt, where does that leave you? A lot of people are counting on them for their retirement, right?
Right.
So there is no easy answer for sure. And we really don't know what the next step is going to be. But the thing is, the current system's unsustainable. So collapse seems to be what's ahead for us.
Right. And as you and I have often discussed, and you've discussed it with other guests, what can the average person do? Well, just try to get multiple income streams. Don't focus on retiring comfortably, because that's going to be maybe a fantasy, but focus on working comfortably.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. No, you have a great point. Working comfortably and really trying to insulate yourself as much as you can from what's ahead there.
Yeah.
Always say some gold and silver is a good idea. Don't put everything into it, because the gyrations of volatility will make you ill. But there's nothing you can do about that. But other things, like you say, invest locally. Great idea there. Because what choice do you really have?
Right. You just don't want to own something that's going to go to zero, which includes a bunch of sovereign bonds, Sallie Mae bonds.
Yes.
A lot of things are going to go to zero. So that's the thing about gold, real estate, farmland, your own business. Those things aren't going to go to zero no matter what happens, So
it's a great point. And that's what you have to beware of, because debt that increases geometrically can't continue to increase geometrically forever, right? Much as the powers that be would like you to believe that it can keep continuing on and on geometrically forever. Can it continue to do that realistically? I don't think so.
Nope.
Prove that, right? I mean,
that's right.
Better mathematical minds than mine, for certain, have proven that just can't be going on.
That's right.
So you need to be prepared. And hey, Charles, keep writing those articles. I'm like, I learn a lot every time I read them. You should read them too. And besides of2minds.com, any other place in particular to find your work?
Well, that's the place to look at all the work. I mean, my stuff tends to get reprinted on David Stockman's Contra Corner, Zero Hedge, Financial Sense, and Kerry Lutz's site.
Oh, of course. Yeah. We always pick up your work on financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Don't be that flattered. You're part of a growing community. We definitely like your work, though, and feel that it really has value. And hey, if you're at the site, you should check it out, because you never know whose work's going to be there. We are the anti-mainstream media. There's actually a site out there that invited me to join it. I'll send you the link, Charles, because it looks like a pretty cool site. You have to be invited to that site. It's called anti-MSM or something like that. It's just, the MSM has just failed us so miserably that everything that they've done over the past 100 years, it's it's pretty pathetic when you get down to the job that they've done, right?
Right. We have to educate ourselves.
Yeah, really important. Never stop educating yourself. That is really the key. Anyway, Charles, thanks for coming on. We will talk with you again soon, and you be well.
Thank you, Kerry. It's been my pleasure.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.
Every week the show is growing. Would you like to be a part of it? Then go to clubfsn.com and help support us with $1, $2, $5, or $10 a month and get a host of premium content with newsletters dropped into your mailbox, free books, private audio clips, webinars, and much more. Then join clubfsn.com. If you want to get ahead of the trend and ensure your family's financial security before it's too late, go to clubfsn.com and sign up.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.